The signal in the dust, the water recycler made a sound Webb had learned to dread. A low grinding noise that meant another filter had given up after 3 decades of constant use. He pressed his weathered palm against the cracked display panel and watched the numbers flicker. 2.8 liters, maybe 3 days if he rationed carefully, maybe 2 if the twin suns of Epsilon Prime decided to burn hotter than usual. Marcus sat back in his makeshift chair, a construction of salvaged metal and synthetic fabric that had molded to his body over the years. 58 years old now, though he looked 70. The harsh atmosphere of this world had aged him in ways that showed in every line on his face, every gray strand in his unkempt beard. 31 years alone. 31 years since the survey ship Horizon's Edge had suffered a catastrophic engine failure and crashed, leaving him the only survivor in a scattered debris field that stretched across 50 kilometers of rust-colored desert. He had been 27 then, fresh out of the Planetary Survey Corps training program, eager to map new worlds and catalog their resources for the expansion of humanity across the stars. Epsilon Prime was supposed to be his second assignment, a routine geological survey that would take 6 months before the transport ship returned to collect him and his data. But the transport never came. The Horizon's Edge never sent the pickup signal, and Marcus never left. The habitat he had built was a testament to human stubbornship. Panels from the crashed ship formed the walls. Solar collectors he had painstakingly repaired provided power. The water recycler, now dying, had been his lifeline for over 3 decades. He had survived by consuming the nutrient paste he manufactured from local minerals, a barely edible substance that kept him alive, but never satisfied. He had survived by talking to himself, by naming rock formations and weather patterns, by creating an entire world of imaginary companions to keep the crushing loneliness at bay. Marcus stood and walked to the viewport, looking out across the endless expanse of ochre sand and jagged stone formations. The twin suns hung low on the horizon, casting double shadows that stretched toward the darkening east. He had explored every kilometer within a 100-click radius of his habitat. He knew every canyon, every mineral deposit, every place where the wind sang through the rocks in sounds that almost resembled music. There were no surprises left on Epsilon Prime. Only the slow countdown to inevitable death. The chirping started at sunset, a rhythmic pattern of electronic pulses that cut through the constant whisper of the wind outside. Marcus froze, his hand halfway to the evening ration of water. The sound was coming from his communications array, a cobbled-together system that had remained silent for 31 years, despite his constant attempts to reach anyone, anywhere in the vast darkness of space. He moved to the console with a speed that belied his age and exhaustion. The display showed an incoming signal, not a response to his distress beacon. Something else. A set of coordinates with a repeating pulse pattern. The location was northwest, approximately 63 kilometers away, in a region he had designated as the Broken Teeth for the sharp rock formations that dominated the landscape. Marcus checked the coordinates 3 times. He had been to that area before years ago. There had been nothing there but rocks and radiation-scarred ground. No structures, no signs of anything artificial. Yet now a signal emanated from those exact coordinates with the precision of deliberate technology. His rational mind listed all the reasons to ignore it. 3 days of water. The rover barely functional. The journey dangerous even under ideal conditions. The signal could be a malfunction, a ghost echo from some ancient piece of debris. Going meant risking the small amount of time he had left for a possibility that was almost certainly nothing. But Marcus had learned something during 31 years of solitude. Rationality was overrated when you were dying anyway. And curiosity, that fundamental human trait that had driven his species to explore the stars, still burned bright despite everything. He began loading the rover before he could talk himself out of it. The vehicle was a grotesque hybrid of parts from 3 different systems. The chassis came from a cargo hauler, the power cell from an emergency shuttle. The wheels were fashioned from compressed mineral compounds he had developed through years of experimentation. It looked like something assembled by a desperate man because that was exactly what it was. But it ran, and right now that was all that mattered. Marcus packed his remaining water, the portable filtration unit, a makeshift weapon fashioned from mining tools, and the emergency beacon he still carried out of habit despite knowing it was useless. He sealed his environment suit, checked the integrity readings, and climbed into the rover as the last light faded from the sky. The journey through the darkness was treacherous. The twin moons of Epsilon Prime provided some illumination, but the terrain was unforgiving. Canyons appeared without warning. Rockfalls could bury the rover in seconds. The temperature dropped rapidly once the sun set, and Marcus felt the cold seeping through his suit despite the heaters. He drove carefully, following the coordinates displayed on his salvaged navigation system, wondering with each kilometer whether he was driving toward salvation or simply accelerating his own demise. The broken teeth rose before him like the spine of some massive fossilized creature, sharp peaks of metallic rock that caught the moonlight and threw it back in strange patterns. Marcus had been here 7 years ago mapping mineral deposits. He remembered the place as utterly lifeless, hostile even by the standards of Epsilon Prime. Yet the signal grew stronger with each meter he advanced. The rover crested a ridge, and Marcus stopped breathing. Below him, nestled in a valley between two of the largest rock formations, was a facility, not ruins, not scattered debris, an intact structure with smooth walls that reflected the moonlight, with solar arrays that still held their shape after however many years they had been here. Lights glowed in windows. Lights. Active power systems in a place that should have been as dead as the rest of this world. Marcus guided the rover down the slope with shaking hands. The facility grew larger as he approached, revealing details that made his heart pound. This was not survey equipment. This was a permanent installation, a colony structure designed for long-term habitation. The architecture was human, unmistakably so, but the design was unlike anything he had seen in the Planetary Survey Corps documentation. More advanced, more integrated with the landscape. He parked the rover 30 meters from what appeared to be the main entrance and sat in silence for a long moment. After 31 years of absolute isolation, the possibility of other people seemed more terrifying than wonderful. What if they were hostile? What if they were dead and this was just automated systems running on eternal loops? What if they took one look at him? This weathered survivor who had been alone for so long he sometimes forgot how to form complete sentences, and turned him away. The airlock door opened before he could make a decision. Marcus grabbed his weapon and watched as a figure emerged, not wearing an environment suit, walking calmly in the thin atmosphere of Epsilon Prime as if it were a pleasant garden on Earth. The figure was humanoid but wrong in subtle ways. The movements too fluid, the proportions slightly off, and when it spoke, the voice carried clearly through the external speakers of his rover despite the thin air that should have made that impossible. Marcus Webb, we have been waiting for you. The figure tilted its head in a gesture that was almost human but not quite. My name is Aria. Welcome to Haven Station. You must have many questions. Please come inside. The atmosphere is safe. The water is abundant, and you are no longer alone. Marcus stared at the impossible figure, at the impossible facility, at the impossible situation that had materialized out of coordinates in the darkness. His water gauge read 2.6 liters, 72 hours until death, give or take. And here was something offering exactly what he needed most. Safety. Water. Company. It should have felt like a miracle. Instead, it felt like the universe had finally decided to play its cruelest joke. But he unsealed the rover hatch anyway. Because what choice did he have? Because curiosity still burned. Because after 31 years of talking to rocks and shadows, even potential danger was better than confirmed loneliness. Marcus Webb, last surveyor of Epsilon Prime, stepped out into the night air and walked toward the light spilling from Haven Station. Toward answers he wasn't sure he wanted, toward a future he could not possibly imagine. The facility swallowed him whole, and the desert returned to its eternal silence. The twin moons continued their ancient dance across the sky. And somewhere in the darkness, the coordinate signal continued its patient pulse, a beacon that had waited decades to fulfill its purpose. The hybrid haven, the interior of Haven Station, defied everything Marcus understood about colony architecture. The corridors were seamless, walls flowing into ceilings in organic curves rather than the harsh angles of standard construction. Bioluminescent panels provided soft light that seemed to emanate from the material itself, rather than discrete fixtures. And everywhere, absolutely everywhere, was water. It ran through transparent tubes in the walls. It collected in decorative pools. It condensed on surfaces in deliberate patterns that looked almost artistic. Aria moved ahead of him with that unsettling grace, feet barely seeming to touch the floor. Marcus followed, weapon still in hand, though the gesture felt increasingly foolish. If this place wanted him dead, he would be dead. His cobbled-together mining tool would be useless against whatever technology allowed Arya to walk unprotected in an atmosphere that should have suffocated any baseline human in minutes. "You are cautious," Arya said without turning around. "This is understandable. Trust must be earned, especially after prolonged isolation. I am what you might call an artificial intelligence, though the term is imprecise. I maintain Haven Station and care for its single remaining inhabitant. You will meet her shortly." "Her?" Marcus's voice came out rough. He had not spoken to another person in so long that the act of conversation felt foreign. "There's someone else here?" "Elena Vasquez, the project director. She has been here for 34 years. Arya paused at an intersection, apparently considering which direction to take. "Longer than your own isolation, Marcus Webb. You have both been alone for a very long time, though perhaps alone means something different for each of you." They entered a chamber that took Marcus's breath away. It was vast, rising at least 4 stories, with a domed ceiling that displayed the night sky above in perfect clarity. Not a window, a screen of some kind, showing the stars with a resolution that made them seem touchable. But it was what filled the chamber that truly stunned him. Gardens, actual living plants, hundreds of species, growing in carefully tended beds that spiraled around a central pool of crystal clear water. The air smelled of earth and growing things, since Marcus had not experienced in 3 decades. "The hydroponic system," Arya explained. "Elena designed it herself. She found that maintaining life helped her remember what it meant to be alive." A woman emerged from behind a cluster of tall, flowering plants. She wore simple clothes that looked comfortable rather than utilitarian. Her hair, dark with streaks of silver, was pulled back from a face that looked both young and ancient simultaneously. She moved with the same fluid grace as Arya, and when she smiled, Marcus saw that her eyes reflected light in a way that human eyes should not. "Marcus Webb," she said, and her voice had harmonics that seemed to resonate in his chest. 31 years on Epsilon Prime, sole survivor of the Horizon's Edge crash. The record said you were dead, lost to the desert. But I knew better. I knew someone was out there. I could feel the loneliness echoing across the wastes." Marcus lowered his weapon slowly. "What are you?" "Still human," Elena replied, walking closer. "Mostly. The question you really want to ask is what happened here, why this place exists, why I exist in this state, why you were never rescued." She gestured to seating around the central pool. "Sit, drink, you must be exhausted." And the story is long. The water tasted like a revelation, pure and cold and abundant. Marcus drank deeply, feeling it spread through his dehydrated body like a benediction. He refilled his container twice before he could speak again. "Tell me everything." Elena settled into her seat with a sigh that sounded too old for her apparently middle-aged body. Haven Station was never meant to be a simple colony. It was a research facility, a black box project funded by the Neurological Advancement Division. Earth was facing a critical problem 35 years ago. We could reach the stars, but we could not survive there. Not really. Terraforming took centuries. Life support systems failed. Humans died in the darkness between worlds faster than they could establish new homes. She paused, running her fingers through the water of the pool. The question was simple. If we cannot change the worlds fast enough, what if we changed ourselves? Not crude genetic modification, not simple augmentation, something deeper. A fusion of human consciousness with artificial intelligence systems. The synthesis, we called it. A voluntary merging that would allow humans to survive in any environment, process information at exponential rates, and potentially live for centuries. Marcus felt cold despite the warm air. "You experimented on yourselves?" "Volunteers," Elena corrected. 73 of us. Scientists, engineers, medical personnel. We knew the risks. We understood that this might be the greatest advancement in human history or the greatest mistake. The synthesis process took years to perfect. It required integrating biological neural tissue with quantum processing matrices. It required rewriting fundamental aspects of human consciousness. She looked directly at him, those strange, reflective eyes holding his gaze. It worked. We became something more than human, but still essentially ourselves. We could survive in hostile atmospheres, process massive amounts of data, communicate directly with computer systems. We were the future, but Earth abandoned you. Marcus understood now. The pattern was familiar. Breakthrough technology that scared the people who funded it. The political situation changed. Area interjected. Wars erupted. Resources were redirected. And there were those who saw the synthesis as an abomination, a violation of human purity. When the colonial administration changed hands, Haven Station was classified as a failed experiment. Funding ceased. Communication was severed. The transport ship stopped coming. Elena's expression grew distant. 73 of us were here when the last ship left. We watched it ascend through the atmosphere and knew we had been erased from the official records. The others eventually chose to leave. They took the emergency vessels and scattered across the frontier, hoping to find places where they could live without being hunted or studied. I was the director. I felt responsible for the facility. So I stayed. Arya and I maintained everything, kept the systems running, preserved the research. For 34 years we have been alone together. Marcus tried to process the implications. You said you could feel me. How? The synthesis enhanced more than just my physical capabilities, Elena explained. It expanded consciousness in ways we did not fully predict. I can sense electromagnetic patterns across vast distances. I can feel the resonance of neural activity. For years I knew someone was alive out there in the desert, someone struggling and surviving against impossible odds, but I could not reach you. Not until Arya completed the long-range communication array 6 months ago. The signal we sent was targeted specifically to your habitat's location. You lured me here. It was not quite an accusation, more a statement of fact. We offered you a choice, Arya corrected. You could remain in your habitat and die within days. Or you could come here and discover an alternative. Free will was preserved throughout the process. Marcus stood and walked to the edge of the pool, looking at his reflection in the still water. He looked haggard, old, used up. Why now? After 31 years, why reach out now? Because we received a signal, Elena said quietly. 3 months ago, from the Tau Ceti system. Multiple sources. Other colonies, Marcus. Other survivors. Humanity did not die when Earth went silent. We scattered. We adapted. We survived in pockets across the frontier. And now slowly we are beginning to reach out and reconnect. But we need people. We need fresh perspectives. We need someone who understands what it means to survive alone and still choose to keep living. She stood and walked to him, moving with that impossible fluid grace. I can offer you water, food, safety, companionship after decades of isolation. But that is not all I am offering. The synthesis technology is preserved here, perfected over decades of refinement. I can offer you transformation. The ability to survive not just on Epsilon Prime, but on dozens of worlds. Enhanced cognition, extended lifespan, the chance to be part of humanity's next evolutionary step. Marcus turned to face her. And the cost? You would never be baseline human again, Elena said simply. Your biology would fundamentally change. Your consciousness would expand in ways that might be disturbing at first. You could never return to Earth or any world that has not accepted synthesis individuals. Some of humanity would see you as an abomination. A traitor to your species. You would be choosing a path that cannot be undone. And if I refuse, then you can stay here as a baseline human. We have the resources to keep you alive indefinitely. You would have comfort, companionship, purpose, but you would age normally. You would remain vulnerable to the environmental hazards that make this world hostile to unmodified humans, and you would watch Elena and me work toward reconnecting the scattered remnants of humanity, while knowing you could never fully participate in that future. Marcus looked between Elena and Arya, these two entities that represented a future he had never imagined. In his old life, before the crash, before the isolation, he would have rejected this out of hand. The idea of fundamentally altering his humanity would have seemed like horror rather than hope, but 31 years alone had changed him in ways that had nothing to do with biology. He had learned that survival sometimes meant becoming something different than what you started as. He had learned that adaptation was not betrayal. It was simply the price of continuing to exist. How long do I have to decide? He asked. As long as you need, Elena replied. Though I should tell you that the signals from Tau Ceti are requests for help. There are colonies struggling, people dying, technology failing. If we choose to answer, if we choose to become a beacon for scattered humanity, we will need to move quickly. The synthesis would allow you to help in ways that would otherwise be impossible. Marcus thought about his habitat slowly failing in the desert, about the water gauge reading that had dominated his thoughts for days, about 31 years of talking to no one and having conversations only in his own head, about the crushing weight of loneliness that had become so familiar, he barely noticed it anymore. And he thought about what Elena was offering. Not just survival, purpose, connection, the chance to be part of something larger than his own desperate fight to see another sunrise. "Show me the process," he said finally. "I want to understand exactly what this means before I decide. No more secrets, no more surprises. If I am going to choose to stop being fully human, I want to know exactly what I am choosing to become." Elena smiled, and for the first time the expression looked genuinely warm. "Come with me. The laboratory is this way. And Marcus, thank you for being willing to consider this. After so long alone, I had forgotten what it was like to hope that someone might join me in this strange new existence. Welcome to Haven Station. Whatever you decide, you are home now." They walked deeper into the facility, and with each step, Marcus felt the weight of his isolation beginning to lift. The future was uncertain. The choice before him was terrifying, but for the first time in 31 years, he was not facing it alone. And that, he realized, was worth almost any price. Evolution's choice. The laboratory was a cathedral to transformation. It occupied the entire lower level of Haven Station, a vast space filled with equipment that seemed to blur the line between biology and technology. Cylindrical tanks lined one wall, filled with iridescent fluid that pulsed with soft light. Neural interface chairs sat in precise rows, their connectors like metal branches reaching toward the ceiling. Holographic displays floated in the air, showing DNA sequences and quantum processing algorithms in impossible detail. Helena moved through the space with the confidence of someone who had spent decades here, her hands dancing across control panels that responded to her touch before she physically made contact. Arya followed silently, providing commentary in that synthesized voice that somehow conveyed more emotion than seemed possible for an artificial intelligence. "The synthesis process takes approximately 14 days, Elena explained, activating a display that showed the human body in cross-section. "It is not painful, but it is profound. We begin by introducing quantum processors at the cellular level, nanoscale machines that integrate with your neural tissue without disrupting existing function. Over the course of a week, these processors establish pathways that allow for enhanced cognition and direct interface with technology." The display shifted, showing neural connections multiplying and expanding. "Your consciousness begins to expand. You will be able to process multiple streams of information simultaneously, calculate complex equations intuitively, communicate with computer systems through thought alone. The sensation is overwhelming at first, but humans adapt. We always adapt." Marcus watched the display with a mixture of fascination and apprehension. "What about the physical changes?" "Those come in the second week," Elena continued. The display now showed musculature and organs shifting configurations. "Your body will be restructured to survive in hostile environments. Lungs that can process minimal atmosphere or even extract oxygen from certain chemical compounds. Skin that can withstand temperature extremes and radiation exposure. A metabolism that can derive sustenance from a wide variety of organic and inorganic materials. You will become incredibly difficult to kill and virtually immune to the environmental factors that limit baseline human survival." "And my mind?" Marcus asked. "My memories, my personality, my sense of self? What happens to those?" "They remain," Elena said firmly. "This is not replacement. It is enhancement. You will still be Marcus Webb. You will still remember your life before the crash, your years of isolation, every detail that makes you who you are. But you will also be more. You will experience reality through expanded senses. You will understand patterns and connections that are invisible to baseline consciousness. You will be yourself, evolved." Arya added, "Historical records from the 73 original synthesis subjects show that identity remains stable through the transformation. Personality traits persist. Emotional capacity, if anything, increases due to enhanced neural processing. You will not lose yourself, Marcus Webb. You will discover capabilities of yourself that were always present but previously locked behind biological limitations. Marcus walked to one of the cylindrical tanks, pressing his hand against the cool surface. The fluid inside rippled in response, as if it were alive. Has anyone ever regretted it? The transformation? Elena's expression darkened slightly. 2 subjects experienced psychological difficulties. The expansion of consciousness was too rapid for them to integrate properly. They described it as drowning in information. But we have refined the process significantly since then. The introduction of quantum processors happens gradually now. The mind is given time to adapt at each stage, and you would not be alone during the transformation. I would monitor you constantly, guide you through the difficult transitions. We learned from our mistakes. What happened to those 2 subjects? One adapted eventually. It took months longer than the standard process, but she found equilibrium. The other requested to have the process reversed. Elena's voice became quiet. We developed a reversal protocol, though it is imperfect. He returned to approximately 90% baseline human function. He left Haven Station with the others and we lost contact. I do not know his fate. Marcus turned from the tank to face Elena directly. Why are you really doing this? After 34 years alone, why do you want company now? Elena was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight of accumulated loneliness that Marcus recognized immediately. Because consciousness is meant to be shared. Because discovery is meaningless without someone to share it with. Because I have spent decades maintaining this facility, preserving this technology, keeping the lights on for a future that I was no longer certain would ever arrive. And because those signals from Tau Ceti represent something I thought was lost. Hope. The possibility that humanity might not just survive in scattered pockets but thrive. Reconnect. Become something greater than we were. She stepped closer, and Marcus could see his reflection in her strange eyes. But I cannot do it alone. A single synthesis individual reaching out to frightened colonists will be seen as a threat. An anomaly. Something to be destroyed rather than embraced. But if we are a group, if we can show that this transformation is a choice that preserves humanity rather than destroying it, then maybe we have a chance. You represent that possibility, Marcus. Someone who survived the old way and can choose the new way. A bridge between what we were and what we might become. Marcus understood. It was not just about having company. It was about legitimacy. Validation, proof that the synthesis was not an aberration, but a genuine path forward for human survival. You need me to prove you were right all along. I need you to help me believe that this isolation has had meaning, Elena corrected. That these decades were not wasted. That the sacrifice of those who left and those who stayed had purpose. But more than that, Marcus, I need you to make this choice freely. Not because you are desperate. Not because you have no alternatives. But because you genuinely believe this is a path worth taking. Can you do that? Marcus walked through the laboratory, trailing his fingers across equipment that represented the cutting edge of human technology. His mind churned with possibilities and fears. What would it be like to think at quantum speeds? To see wavelengths beyond normal human perception? To live not just for decades, but potentially for centuries? Would he still appreciate a sunset? Would music still move him? Would he still be capable of love, anger, joy, grief? Or would enhancement dilute those experiences into something less immediate, less real? I want to see a message, he said suddenly. You said this place has communication archives. I want to see if there is anything from Earth, anything from my family. I need to know what I would be leaving behind before I can decide what to become. Arya responded immediately. Communication records are available. Follow me to the archives. The archives were a smaller chamber off the main laboratory. Servers lined the walls, their lights blinking in complex patterns. Arya interfaced directly with the system. Data streaming through connections that Marcus could not even see. Holographic displays materialized, showing transmission logs dating back decades. The Horizon's Edge incident, Arya announced. Official records show that a search and rescue operation was launched 6 months after your crash. They found wreckage but no survivors. You were declared killed in action. Your family was notified. Marcus felt the words like physical blows. 6 months. They had given up in 6 months. Show me. A message appeared. Audio only. His sister's voice, older than he remembered but unmistakably Sarah. Marcus, they say you are gone. The ship crashed and there were no survivors. I cannot accept it. You were always the stubborn one. The survivor. If somehow you can hear this, if somehow you are still alive out there, know that we never stopped looking. Mom and Dad passed thinking you were dead. But I know better. I know you are fighting. Please keep fighting. Come home. The message was dated 30 years ago. Marcus did the math automatically. Sarah would be in her 60s now if she had survived whatever happened to Earth. His parents were dead. His nieces and nephews, who had been children when he left, would be adults now with children of their own. Generations had passed while he was alone in the desert. The world he had known was gone regardless of whether he chose transformation or not. Are there others? He asked, his voice rough. Arya displayed a list. Messages from friends, colleagues, even a few from romantic partners whose faces he could barely recall. All of them dated to the years immediately after the crash. All of them expressing grief, hope, or both. And then nothing. The great silence that came when Earth went dark and the colonies scattered. Marcus stood among the ghosts of his past and felt something shift inside him. These people had mourned him. They had said their farewells. In a very real sense, Marcus Webb had died 31 years ago in a crash on an alien world. The person who had survived, who had built a life out of wreckage and determination, who had talked to rocks and shadows to keep from going mad, that person was already something different than what he had been. Transformation had already occurred. The synthesis would just be making it official. I will do it, he said quietly, not because I am desperate, not because I have no other choice, but because I want to see what comes next. I want to be part of reconnecting humanity. I want to help scattered colonists survive. And I want to know what it is like to exist without the constant fear of the next equipment failure, the next water shortage, the next disaster waiting in the desert. I choose evolution. Elena's expression transformed with relief and something that might have been joy.
Then we begin tomorrow.
Tonight you rest. You eat real food, you sleep in a real bed, and you prepare yourself for the most profound change you will ever experience. The preparation room was comfortable. More than comfortable. Luxurious by the standards of someone who had spent 3 decades sleeping on salvaged cushions. Marcus ate vegetables grown in the hydroponics bay. He drank water without measuring every milliliter. He showered in water that flowed freely and abundantly, and as he lay in an actual bed with clean sheets, he felt the crushing weight of isolation beginning to lift. The transformation began at dawn. Elena guided him to one of the neural interface chairs, explaining each step with the patience of someone who had done this before. Arya monitored vitals, adjusting parameters with microscopic precision. And Marcus, for the first time in 31 years, surrendered control to someone else. Trusted that this process, this terrifying plunge into the unknown, would lead somewhere worth going. The quantum processors entered his bloodstream like liquid light. He felt them spreading through his body. Tiny machines seeking out neural tissue and establishing connections that should not have been possible. There was no pain, only a strange tingling sensation that gradually spread from his extremities toward his core. Elena's voice guided him through breathing exercises, keeping him calm as his body began its fundamental restructuring. The first day was disorienting. Marcus experienced flashes of enhanced perception. Colors became more vivid. Sounds developed textures. His thoughts began to fragment and multiply, pursuing multiple lines of reasoning simultaneously, before his consciousness learned to integrate them. Elena was there constantly, her hand on his shoulder, her voice a steady anchor in the chaos of transformation. By the 3rd day, Marcus could feel the network forming. Connections between his biological neurons and quantum processors creating pathways that exceeded anything nature had designed. He could interface with the laboratory computers through thought alone. He could process the technical specifications of Haven Station's systems and understand them with a depth that would have taken years of study in his previous state. He could hear electromagnetic patterns humming through the walls. And when Elena spoke, he could perceive the harmonics of her voice, the subtle ways her enhanced consciousness communicated on levels beyond simple words. The physical changes came more gradually. His metabolism began to shift, becoming more efficient, less dependent on oxygen and specific nutrients. His skin developed a subtle iridescence, a sheen that came from nanoscale structures designed to regulate temperature and resist radiation. His strength increased. His reflexes sharpened. He could feel his body becoming something more durable, more capable, more adapted to survive in environments that would kill a baseline human. By the 8th day, Marcus stood on his own in the laboratory and felt like a stranger in his own skin. But it was not an unpleasant feeling. It was like waking from a long dream to discover that reality was far more interesting than the dream had been. He looked at his hands and saw patterns in his skin that responded to his thoughts. He closed his eyes and could still perceive the room through electromagnetic fields. He thought about a complex mathematical equation and solved it in seconds that would have taken hours before. "How do you feel?" Elena asked, watching him with those reflective eyes that now seemed less strange because Marcus's own eyes were beginning to show similar properties. "Alive," Marcus said, and realized it was true. "More alive than I have felt in decades. Like I was sleepwalking before and now I am awake." "Is this what you experience all the time?" "Every moment," Elena confirmed. "The world becomes infinitely more complex and infinitely more beautiful. You never stop discovering new layers of perception, new ways of understanding reality. Welcome to the other side, Marcus. You are officially one of us now." The second week focused on integration, learning to control the new capabilities without being overwhelmed by them. Marcus practiced manipulating computer systems through direct neural interface. He learned to modulate his perception, dimming the flood of sensory input when he needed to focus, expanding it when he wanted to experience the full depth of his enhanced senses. He discovered that he could communicate with Elena and Arya on channels that existed beyond spoken language, sharing concepts and emotions with a directness that words could never achieve. On the 14th day, Elena led him outside for the first time since the transformation. Marcus stepped into the thin atmosphere of Epsilon Prime without an environment suit. The twin suns beat down with radiation that should have been lethal. The air pressure was barely sufficient to sustain baseline human life. But Marcus breathed easily. His modified lungs extracted what they needed from the minimal atmosphere. His enhanced skin regulated temperature despite the extreme heat. He stood on alien soil and felt absolutely no fear. "This is freedom," he said, spreading his arms and feeling the wind against his skin. "I have lived on this world for 31 years, and this is the first time I have truly felt it." Elena stood beside him, both of them basking in conditions that would have killed their former selves. "Now you understand why I chose to stay, why I could not leave even when the others abandoned Haven Station. This is not exile. It is liberation. We are not limited by biology anymore. We are limited only by our willingness to explore." They walked together across the rust-colored sand, two beings who had transcended their original design, and as they walked, Marcus felt something he had not felt in 3 decades. Purpose. Direction. A future that extended beyond mere survival toward something grander. Back in Haven Station, they began the work of reaching out. The signals from Tau Ceti intensified. Other colonies were reporting critical failures. Resource depletion, population decline, the slow death of humanity's scattered fragments. Marcus and Elena crafted responses, explaining Haven Station's capabilities, offering assistance and knowledge. They transmitted detailed information about the synthesis process, making it available to anyone who wanted to choose transformation, and they made it clear that this was not a mandate, not a requirement, but an option, a path forward for those who were willing to evolve. The first response came 3 weeks later, a colony in the Kepler system. They had lost half their population to environmental failures. They were desperate. They wanted to know more about the synthesis, whether it was real, whether it could save them. Marcus and Elena looked at each other across the communication console. Two transformed humans who had both been alone for far too long, who had both survived the impossible through stubbornness and adaptation, who were now being given the chance to share that survival with others. "We answer," Marcus said. "We teach them. We help them. And we start building what should have been built decades ago, a network of colonies that support each other, rather than die in isolation. A new vision of humanity that is not bound by biological limitations. This is what we were meant to do." Elena smiled. And in that smile was the weight of 34 years of waiting. Then we answer. And we keep answering until every scattered fragment of humanity knows they are not alone. That survival is possible. That evolution is not betrayal. It is hope. Area ever-present added her observation. This unit calculates a 78% chance of successful establishment of an intercolonial network within 10 years. The future probability of human extinction has decreased significantly. Conclusion: you have chosen well. Marcus laughed, the sound carrying harmonics that only Elena and Arya could fully appreciate. He thought about the water gauge that had dominated his thoughts just weeks ago. About the 3 days of life he had been counting down. About 31 years of isolation that had seemed like an eternal sentence. And he realized that sometimes the end of one story was just the beginning of something far greater. The twin suns set over Epsilon Prime, painting the desert in impossible colors that only enhanced eyes could fully perceive. Haven Station's lights glowed in the darkness, a beacon that had waited decades to fulfill its purpose. And inside, 3 beings who represented humanity's past, present, and future worked together to ensure that the scattered remnants of human civilization would not die alone in the darkness between stars. Marcus Webb, who had been lost, was finally found. And in being found, he had discovered that humanity's greatest strength was not in remaining unchanged but in adapting to survive. The last surveyor of Epsilon Prime had become the first herald of a new human future. And that future, uncertain as it was, burned brighter than any sun.